The story begins in the tense, uncertain days of 1941. The United States was on the edge of war, and the Navy knew one brutal truth. If a new generation of carrier-based bombers didn't arrive soon, America's fleet would stand no chance against the Japanese Navy's fast and heavily armed ships. The call went out for a new torpedo bomber, one faster, stronger, and more accurate than anything that had ever flown from a carrier deck. At a small design office tucked inside Grumman Aircraft's Long Island plant, an engineer named Leroy Grumman and his restless team began sketching what would soon become one of the most debated aircraft of the war. What they created would look bulky, almost awkward, with folding wings, a massive radial engine, and a bomb bay large enough to carry a torpedo the size of a small car. Critics at the Bureau of Aeronautics frowned. They called it over-engineered, too complicated, and too heavy to fly from a carrier. Some believed it would never survive combat, much less take off from a pitching deck in the Pacific. But Grumman's philosophy was simple: build it strong enough to bring its crew home. And so, the project moved forward under the Navy designation TBF Avenger. When the first prototype took flight in August 1941, the results were mixed. The aircraft was large and heavy, but stable. Its complex folding wings, a Grumman trademark, worked flawlessly. Pilots described it as forgiving, a trait rare for a torpedo bomber. Inside its belly, the massive bay could hold a Mark 13 torpedo or 4 500-pound bombs. It wasn't elegant, but it was powerful. Then came December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Overnight, the Avenger went from prototype to urgent necessity. Production lines lit up across Long Island. Grumman's factory, nicknamed the Iron Works, worked around the clock. The same overcomplicated machine that had been mocked just months before was now the Navy's only hope for a modern torpedo bomber. By the spring of 1942, the first Avengers rolled onto the decks of the brand-new carrier USS Hornet. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. The Battle of Midway was looming. 6 TBF Avengers, still untested in real combat, were ordered into action. On June 4, 1942, they roared off the deck into a sky filled with enemy fighters. It was their first and bloodiest test. 5 of the 6 were shot down. Only one limped back to base, riddled with bullet holes and fuel leaking from every seam. To outsiders, it looked like failure. But to the men who saw what the aircraft endured, the Avenger's toughness became legendary. It had taken unimaginable punishment and still brought its crew home. That was all Leroy Grumman ever wanted. Within months, production skyrocketed. Pilots began to trust the complicated design. Its defensive turret, powered hydraulically, gave gunners a wide arc of fire, a lifesaver against Zero fighters. Its rugged structure could take hits that would destroy lighter planes. And soon, the Avenger's reputation began to change, from too complex to unbreakable. As the war raged on, the Avenger would fly from the Pacific to the Atlantic, sinking ships, submarines, and surviving missions that others couldn't. Its early struggles were forgotten. What remained was its record, and a legend that began with doubt, ridicule, and a belief that complexity could never win a war. But the Avenger would prove them all wrong. Because sometimes, the designs that seem overcomplicated on paper become the ones that save lives and change history. Behind every great machine stands a mind unwilling to accept limits. For the Avenger, that mind belonged to Leroy Grumman, a quiet, methodical engineer whose genius was forged in the workshop rather than the classroom. Born in 1895, Grumman grew up in the small town of Huntington, New York. He was fascinated by the sky from the moment he saw his first biplane buzz overhead. But unlike the daredevil pilots of his generation, Grumman wasn't drawn to the cockpit. He was drawn to the mechanics that made flight possible. After earning his degree in mechanical engineering from Cornell, He joined the U.S. Navy during World War I as a test pilot and engineer. It was there he learned a crucial truth. Pilots didn't need aircraft that were the fastest or the prettiest. They needed aircraft that could bring them home alive. That single idea became the foundation of his entire design philosophy. When he founded the Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation in 1930, the company started small, just a handful of engineers working in an abandoned garage on Long Island. But their focus was clear: create machines that could survive anything. From that workshop came aircraft like the F-4F Wildcat, a stubby, rugged fighter that helped hold the line in the early dark days of World War II. But even as the Wildcat found success, Grumman was already thinking ahead. He knew that the Navy's aging torpedo bombers, slow, fragile, and prone to disaster, wouldn't survive the coming storm. He believed that an aircraft could be powerful and durable, complex and reliable, if built the right way. That belief guided the birth of the Avenger. Grumman gathered a small, trusted team men who shared his obsession with mechanical precision. They worked long nights under the harsh glow of factory lamps, sketching, calculating, and arguing over every detail. The result was an aircraft that looked massive on paper but felt surprisingly balanced in the air. Its wings folded using Grumman's ingenious STO wing mechanism, a design so elegant that even rival engineers had to admit it was brilliant. Still, many in the Navy doubted him. Too heavy, they said, too complex for carrier operations. But Grumman's calm confidence never wavered. He would personally walk through the factory floor, greeting mechanics by name, checking rivets with his own hands. He treated his workers like partners, not subordinates, and in return, they gave him unwavering loyalty. The plant became known as the Iron Works, not just for its metal, but for its spirit. As production of the Avenger ramped up, Grumman refused to cut corners. He demanded armor protection for the crew, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a fully enclosed turret features that made the Avenger heavier, but far safer. He once said, "If it takes one more pound of steel to bring a man home, it's worth it." His commitment paid off. When the first Avenger squadrons went into combat, they discovered that this so-called overcomplicated machine could take a beating and still fight back. Many pilots would later say they owed their lives to Leroy Grumman's obsession with strength. By 1943, the Avenger had become the backbone of the Navy's torpedo bomber force, and Grumman himself had become a symbol of American ingenuity. Yet he never sought fame. He rarely gave interviews and avoided the spotlight. What mattered most to him wasn't his name painted on a hangar, but the letters that arrived from returning airmen, short, heartfelt notes that simply said, "Thank you. Your plane got me home." In those quiet words lay the proof that his vision had worked. The Avenger wasn't just another aircraft. It was a promise kept, a flying testament to one man's belief that engineering, at its best, is an act of compassion as much as it is an act of genius. And as the war continued, that belief would carry thousands of men across oceans, and safely back again. When the blueprints for the TBF Avenger were first unrolled across the drafting tables at Grumman's Long Island plant, even seasoned engineers blinked in disbelief. The bomber looked more like a flying tank than a naval aircraft. Every inch of its frame was layered with systems, hydraulics, armor, electric turrets, and fuel lines that wound like veins through a mechanical giant. To some, it seemed overthought. To others, it was a masterpiece in progress. Leroy Grumman's team wasn't trying to build something pretty. They were building something that could endure. The Avenger's fuselage was designed with a robust internal framework, capable of absorbing brutal stress during carrier launches and hard deck landings. At over 10,000 pounds fully loaded, it was one of the heaviest single-engine aircraft the Navy had ever seen. Yet Grumman's engineers believed that strength was survival. The heart of the Avenger was the Wright R 2600 twin Cyclone engine. a 14-cylinder radial powerhouse producing over 1,700 horsepower. It wasn't sleek, but it was dependable. This engine gave the Avenger the muscle to haul a full-size torpedo or an array of bombs deep into enemy territory. Its broad wings, strengthened by steel spars, allowed it to carry the heavy load without compromising stability. But what truly set the Avenger apart was its technology. Grumman's signature STO wing folding system allowed both wings to rotate and fold flat against the fuselage, saving precious space on crowded carrier decks. The mechanism looked absurdly complicated, hundreds of moving parts synchronized by cables and hydraulic pistons. Yet it worked flawlessly, even in the salt and wind of the open sea. Inside the cockpit, the layout was a study in careful engineering. The pilot sat under a large greenhouse canopy with clear visibility in every direction, while the radioman and gunner worked behind him in a tight but efficient space. The Avenger's fully powered dorsal turret, built by the innovative company Emerson Electric, gave its gunner a 360-degree field of fire, something almost unheard of in earlier Navy bombers. Beneath them, the bomb bay doors were controlled by hydraulic actuators that could open and close in seconds, allowing torpedoes or bombs to drop cleanly into the sea below. However, every advantage came with a price. The Avenger's complexity made it difficult to maintain. Mechanics often joked that it took a genius and a wrench just to change a cable. The hydraulic systems leaked, the folding wing joints required constant lubrication, and the internal wiring was a maze. Yet, when the aircraft took to the air, those same mechanics stood on the deck in awe. The flying anvil, as they called it, handled like something much lighter. Its wide wings gave it a surprising grace in turns, and its stability made it an ideal weapons platform. Pilots who transitioned from older models like the TBD Devastator immediately noticed the difference. The Devastator had been fragile, slow, and unforgiving. The Avenger felt alive, powerful, responsive, and, above all, safe. Even when struck by enemy fire, its armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks often kept the crew alive long enough to make it home. The irony was clear. The very features that critics had labeled as overcomplicated were the ones saving lives. In the chaos of battle, simplicity could mean vulnerability, but complexity, when mastered, could mean survival. As the Pacific campaign intensified, squadrons learned to trust the machine's quirks. Ground crews developed routines, and pilots discovered how to push the Avenger's limits. Over time, the bomber's mechanical sophistication stopped being a liability and became its defining strength. Grumman's engineers had proved something profound: too smart could work, if built with purpose. The Avenger's design wasn't a mistake. It was a statement that technology, discipline, and detail could overcome fear, chaos, and even the sea itself. In the skies over the Pacific, that philosophy would soon be tested like never before. Every great machine earns its legend through failure before triumph, and the TBF Avenger was no exception. By early 1942, Grumman's massive torpedo bomber was ready for its first true test. On paper, it was everything the Navy had asked for: powerful, durable, and capable of striking deep into enemy waters. But between the blueprints and the battlefield lay a long, uncertain road filled with trial, error, and sheer determination. The first prototypes rolled out of the Grumman plant in Bethpage, New York, and were quickly handed over to Navy test pilots. Almost immediately, problems surfaced. The aircraft's immense weight made takeoffs from carrier decks risky. During early tests aboard the USS Long Island, several pilots reported that the Avenger barely cleared the bow before sinking alarmingly close to the ocean surface. Others noted that the hydraulic systems, which powered the folding wings, turret, and bomb bay, were prone to leaking and slow to respond in cold air. Grumman's engineers took notes, returned to their drafts, and worked tirelessly to improve the design. Reinforcements were added to the landing gear to handle hard carrier landings. The engine mounts were strengthened, and the cockpit instrumentation was simplified for easier operation in combat. Each change came from real-world feedback, often from pilots who risked their lives testing an unfinished aircraft. Then came the Battle of Midway, June 1942, the Avengers trial by fire. Only 6 Avengers from Torpedo Squadron 8 were available, freshly delivered and barely tested. They launched from Midway Island into a sky already filled with Japanese fighters. One by one, they were cut down. 5 of the 6 were destroyed. Only one limped back, shot to pieces, its turret shattered, its radio dead. To the Navy brass, it looked like a disaster. But to those who examined the wreckage, a different story emerged. The surviving Avenger had absorbed dozens of hits and still managed to land. Its pilot, Ensign Albert Ernest, and his gunner had survived, proof that Grumman's obsession with durability was justified. The plane's structure had held when no other torpedo bomber could. In the aftermath, Grumman's team doubled down. They strengthened armor plating around the cockpit and fuel tanks, improved the self-sealing system, and refined the hydraulic lines. Mechanics were trained to service the aircraft faster, and pilots learned new takeoff techniques to handle the bomber's heavy load. Every failure became a lesson, every damaged aircraft a blueprint for improvement. By the end of 1942, the Avenger was ready for a second chance, and this time it delivered. At the Battle of Guadalcanal, Avengers from the USS Enterprise struck Japanese shipping with precision and returned home safely, earning respect from even the most skeptical commanders. The once overcomplicated bomber was proving itself to be a survivor, not just of engineering trials, but of war itself. As reports came in from the Pacific, confidence grew. Pilots began to call it the Grumman Ironworks Special, a tribute to both the factory's nickname and the aircraft's toughness. For the first time, crews felt that they were flying something that could truly protect them. The Avenger wasn't perfect. It was big, heavy, and sometimes stubborn, but it was also reliable in a way that few aircraft could match. Behind every improvement stood the same core belief that had guided Grumman from the start. Perfection isn't built in a lab. It's forged through experience. The Avenger's journey from an untested prototype to a battle-hardened weapon mirrored the war itself. Unpredictable, costly, but unstoppable in its evolution. By the dawn of 1943, the TBF Avenger had transformed from a controversial project into the Navy's most trusted torpedo bomber. The trials had not broken it, they had defined it. And in that transformation, the Avenger earned something no blueprint could ever guarantee: the faith of the men who flew it. By 1943, the Grumman TBF Avenger had survived its growing pains. What had once been dismissed as an overcomplicated experiment was now reshaping how the U.S. Navy fought its battles. But its success didn't come from design alone. It came from the men who learned to fight with it in ways no one had ever imagined before. The early months of the Pacific War had proven one hard truth: the old tactics no longer worked. The TBD Devastator, its slow speed and weak defenses, had been massacred at Midway. Torpedo attacks made in tight, straight lines were suicide against Japan's Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Pilots needed a new approach, something that used the Avenger's strengths instead of exposing its size. That new doctrine emerged slowly, tested in blood and desperation. Instead of charging head-on in rigid formations, Avenger squadrons began to attack in coordinated waves. Dive bombers would strike first, forcing Japanese ships to turn and break formation. Then, flying low over the water, the Avengers would sweep in from multiple directions. Fast, heavy, and deadly. The enemy gunners could no longer focus their fire in one place. Confusion replaced precision, and in that chaos, torpedoes found their marks. The Avenger's durability made these low-level attacks possible. Pilots often flew barely 50 feet above the ocean's surface, skimming through spray so close that waves kissed their bomb bays. If a gunner was hit or an engine damaged, the aircraft could still carry on. It wasn't uncommon for Avengers to return to their carriers riddled with holes, sometimes missing flaps, sometimes with landing gear jammed, yet still alive. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea and later at Leyte Gulf, these tactics reached perfection. Avengers hunted enemy convoys, sneaking beneath radar and cloud cover, coordinating with Navy codebreakers and reconnaissance planes. Their long range allowed them to reach ships that no other aircraft could threaten. Using radar-assisted navigation, one of the first of its kind, they could strike targets even in the dark or through storms. It was in these late-war operations that the Avenger evolved from torpedo bomber to multi-role weapon. When Japanese shipping began to dwindle, Avengers were re-equipped for anti-submarine patrols. They carried depth charges, rockets, and even radar pods beneath their wings. Their crews developed hunter-killer tactics, one plane flying low with radar, the other ready to strike the moment a submarine surfaced. For the first time, aircraft, not destroyers, dominated the undersea battlefield. The flexibility of the Avenger also inspired a new kind of teamwork between air and sea. Carrier commanders began launching combined arms missions, where Avengers, Hellcats, and dive bombers struck together in tightly timed attacks. The idea of independent, specialized squadrons was giving way to integrated strike groups, a concept that would define carrier warfare for generations to come. Pilots who once doubted the aircraft now swore by it. One squadron commander famously said, "If the Avenger can't do it, it can't be done." Their missions extended from ocean battles to coastal raids, supply interdiction, and even night bombing runs. The aircraft's spacious interior allowed the installation of radar screens and extra radio gear, turning it into an early form of airborne command post. By 1944, the Avenger had become a symbol of modern naval warfare, not just a weapon, but a platform that changed how wars were fought. The lessons learned from its tactics rewrote the Navy's playbook. Attack from multiple axes, adapt to any role, and trust in machines that could survive the impossible. In the skies over the Pacific, the Avenger wasn't just delivering torpedoes, it was delivering a new era of warfare. It proved that the future belonged to aircraft that were not merely fast but versatile, not just deadly but enduring. And through that evolution, the Navy itself transformed from a fleet chained to the sea to one that ruled the skies above it. By 1944, the Grumman TBF Avenger had become more than just a machine. It was a symbol of reliability, strength, and vengeance. The aircraft that had once limped home from its first battle at Midway now dominated the skies from the Solomon Islands to the Philippines. And as the Pacific War reached its climax, the Avenger's combat record would become nothing short of legendary. The numbers tell a story no critic could argue with. The Avenger recorded the highest kill ratio of any U.S. Navy aircraft of the war, an astonishing feat for a bomber designed to crawl low and slow through the deadliest airspace on Earth. It wasn't speed or agility that earned it this reputation, but endurance, discipline, and the skill of its crews. By mid-1944, Avengers were operating from almost every major U.S. carrier. They struck at the heart of Japanese naval power in battles like the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, and the Marianas Campaign. During the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Avengers launched coordinated torpedo and bombing runs that shattered enemy formations. Pilots described seeing Japanese destroyers and carriers vanish under towering columns of smoke and flame. In one day, over 300 enemy aircraft and several warships were destroyed, many by Avenger squadrons operating with deadly precision. But the kill ratio wasn't only about ships or planes, it was about survival. For every Avenger lost, many more returned home battered but intact. Its self-sealing fuel tanks and thick armor turned what would have been fatal hits for other aircraft into stories of miraculous survival. Pilots routinely returned to base with wings shredded, control cables severed or engines burning, and still managed to land. The Avenger's defensive armament also played a crucial role. The powered turret, armed with twin .50 caliber machine guns, became a guardian angel for the crew. Japanese Zero pilots often underestimated it, until the turret opened fire. Many attackers never made a second pass. The addition of the ventral gun gave the bomber full coverage against diving enemies, creating a defensive sphere few fighters dared to challenge. One of the most famous Avenger pilots was Lieutenant George H.W. Bush, who flew combat missions in the Pacific as the youngest naval aviator of his time. On September 2, 1944, his Avenger was hit by heavy anti-aircraft fire during a bombing run over Shikijima. Despite flames engulfing his aircraft, Bush completed his attack before bailing out over the ocean, a testament to both the courage of the pilot and the ruggedness of the machine. He survived, rescued by a U.S. submarine, while the Avenger that carried him burned and sank, a symbol of sacrifice and endurance. As the war pressed on, Avengers expanded their kill record beyond ships and planes. In the Atlantic, they hunted German U-boats with radar-guided precision, sinking dozens of submarines. In the Pacific, they crippled enemy shipping lanes, wiped out supply convoys, and destroyed vital infrastructure. Wherever they flew, destruction followed, and yet the crews always spoke of the aircraft with affection, calling it the plane that brought you back. By 1945, when Japan's surrender was imminent, the Avengers' combat record was staggering. Over 7,500 aircraft had been built, and they had flown hundreds of thousands of sorties. Their confirmed destruction of enemy vessels, submarines, and aircraft stood unmatched. Not only did the Avenger achieve the highest kill ratio of any U.S. Navy aircraft, but it also held one of the lowest loss rates, a combination that defied every prediction made in its early years. Historians would later call it the quiet killer, a workhorse that achieved greatness without glamour. While fighters like the Hellcat and Corsair captured headlines, it was the Avenger that did the dirty, dangerous work day after day and kept winning. Its kill ratio wasn't built on luck or design alone, but on trust. Pilots trusting their plane, crews trusting each other, and engineers trusting that complexity, when crafted with care, could become strength. In the end, the Avenger's numbers told only half the story. The rest lived in the men who flew her, men who came home because the machine beneath them refused to die. The TBF Avenger wasn't just an aircraft with an unmatched kill record. It was proof that innovation, persistence, and faith in human ingenuity could turn the tide of war and write a legacy that would never be forgotten. Every machine has a story, but the truth of the Avenger lives in the voices of the men who flew it. Inside its heavy fuselage, surrounded by the hum of the Wright Cyclone engine and the smell of oil and gunpowder, three men shared a bond few could understand: the pilot, the radio man, and the turret gunner. Together, they faced the vast, merciless Pacific, and together, they discovered what the word endurance really meant. Pilots who first climbed into the TBF Avenger were often surprised by its size. The cockpit sat high above the nose, giving them a commanding view of the ocean. It felt like flying a battleship, one veteran later recalled. You didn't dance with it, you wrestled it into the air. But once it was up there, it felt unshakable. That strength gave confidence. Many pilots had come from the fragile TBD Devastator, a death trap by comparison. The Avenger's controls were heavy but steady. Its wide wings and forgiving nature made it the kind of aircraft that could survive a rough carrier landing, a hit from anti-aircraft fire, or a sudden engine failure. You could feel that Grumman built it for you, another pilot said. It didn't care if you made mistakes. It wanted to bring you home. But inside, the Avenger was no comfort. Space was tight. The radio man crouched in a small compartment behind the pilot, surrounded by cables, switches, and the endless tapping of Morse code. The turret gunner climbed into his glass bubble above the fuselage, isolated and exposed, his only connection to the others through an intercom that often failed mid-fight. "You felt alone up there," recalled one gunner. "You could see the tracers coming straight at you, but you couldn't duck. All you could do was shoot back." Their missions stretched for hours over endless ocean, sometimes under a blazing sun, sometimes through black storm clouds. They flew low and slow, often within range of every gun on an enemy ship. "The flak looked like someone throwing black marbles in the sky," remembered Ensign John Lang, an Avenger pilot at Leyte Gulf. "You could hear the shrapnel pinging off the wings, but you couldn't turn away. You had to hold steady until the torpedo was gone." Even after years of combat, that moment, the torpedo drop, never lost its tension. The pilot's hands would tighten on the stick, the bomb bay doors would open with a hiss, and the sea would rise up beneath them. Once the weapon was released, they'd climb as fast as the heavy plane allowed, praying the torpedo ran true. Many times it did, and when it didn't, they still had to face the enemy fire coming back at them. Yet for all its danger, the Avenger inspired fierce loyalty. Crews trusted it with their lives. One squadron commander wrote, "If you went down in an Avenger, you had a chance. In anything else, you were gone." Countless stories told of pilots returning with fuel tanks punctured, wings shredded, and controls nearly dead, but still managing to land on their carriers. Mechanics joked that the only thing that could kill an Avenger was running out of ocean. In the war's final year, new pilots arrived, young men barely out of training, many of them just 19 or 20. Veterans passed down their hard-earned lessons. How to use the trim tabs in rough weather, how to line up a torpedo run, how to stay calm when the world around you exploded. "The plane was our teacher," one said. "Every mission it showed us what we could survive." After the war, many of those men never saw their Avengers again. The aircraft were scrapped, sold, or left to rust on forgotten airfields. But the memories stayed vivid. Decades later, old airmen still spoke of the rhythmic roar of the engine, the way the wings folded like a bird at rest, the moments of silence after a mission when they realized, somehow, they were still alive. To them, the Avenger was more than an airplane. It was a guardian, heavy, stubborn, loyal, a machine that carried them through fear, through loss, and through the long journey home. And even now, when those who flew her are few, the echoes of their voices remain, carried on the wind like the steady hum of that old Wright Cyclone engine, still flying somewhere beyond the horizon.